Opening the center, this pawn stake immediately influences crucial central squares and prepares for rapid piece development. Asserting central space immediately, this response contests the pawn's dominion and opens lines for development. Unpinning the d5 pawn immediately pressures black's central pawn structure, preparing for aggressive pawn play. Developing the knight to f6 is a standard response, solidifying the d5 pawn and preparing for kingside castling while challenging white's bishop. Solidifying the pawn structure and preparing to develop the bishop to a more active square while giving black options. Venturing the knight to e4 creates an immediate positional dilemma, forcing white to react rather than consolidate. Relocating the bishop to f4 solidifies control over the central squares, while preparing for potential pawn advances or piece development. Developing the bishop to this square offers excellent diagonal influence and prepares for future central pawn advancements. Opening the kingside with this pawn thrust sacrifices piece activity for central influence and a potential attacking springboard. Re-establishing knight activity, this retreat frees up the e-pawn for further central expansion and maintains flexibility. Gaining space aggressively on the kingside often leaves queenside development lagging and creates pawn weaknesses. Unleashing the bishop to its natural diagonal now prepares for a kingside pawn storm, but watch for tactical weaknesses. Aggressively staking a claim on the kingside, white aims to dislodge the black knight and disrupt black's harmonious development with an eye towards future kingside pawn storms. Reinforcing the pawn chain against white's aggressive pawn storm, preventing further kingside penetration. Disrupting black's fianchetto, the bishop vacates its square, preparing to eye the kingside or support a central advance. Exchanging the bishop here surrenders a valuable attacking piece and centralizes black's knight. Reclaiming the center and opening the queen's diagonal for pressure, white aims to exploit the now unprotected queenside. Solidifying central influence, this pawn anchors black's structure, preparing potential queenside expansion while maintaining a defensive posture against white's aggressive pawn advances. Fortifying the central pawn structure and developing a key piece, this knight prepares for potential queenside pressure. The knight embarks on an ambitious journey, aiming to displace white's powerful bishop from the kingside. Developing this knight to its edge grants white greater flexibility, aiming to reinforce the kingside pawn push while preparing for queenside expansion. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing queenside expansion, this move centers black's pieces while opening a diagonal for the dark-squared bishop. Castling queenside immediately injects a dynamic, attacking energy, creating an imbalance and preparing to unleash a pawn storm against black's relatively passive setup. Unleashing the queen towards the kingside, black creates immediate pressure on the now exposed white king, forcing a defensive adjustment and hinting at aggressive intentions. Securing the monarch from potential diagonals and advancing the queenside pawns, this prophylactic repositioning clears the d-file for a potential rook. Securing the monarch amidst the chaotic queenside pawns is a prudent step, fortifying the castled king's sanctuary. Aggressively pushing pawns, white seeks to cramp black's queenside and potentially open a path towards the king. Opening a crucial file for future rook activity, black strategically accepts the pawn sacrifice, aiming to disrupt white's king's safety. Opening the h-file creates immediate attacking possibilities against black's uncastled king and forces black to react defensively. Liberating the h-file opens new avenues for your rooks to penetrate enemy defenses. Reclaiming the open file establishes crucial pressure, forcing black to react to the unleashed power of white's rooks. A surprising retreat, seemingly abandoning the central fight to regroup and possibly prepare a flank attack. Unleashing the rook to the 8th rank, white aims to suffocate black's queenside while the king remains exposed. Threatening the queen forces a repositioning, potentially disrupting black's coordination and exposing weaknesses. Asserting queenside space, this pawn advance prepares to disrupt black's development and potentially exploit the weakened light squares on the c-file. Sensing danger around the king, Black wisely reorients the queen to a more defensive posture. Unleashing central energy, White disrupts Black's cramped position, aiming to seize initiative. The knight's journey to d6 aims to bolster the center and potentially launch an attack on White's slightly exposed king. Unleashing a pawn storm on the king side, this advance aims to shatter Black's defensive structure and exploit the open files. Opening the f-file presents an immediate threat to the exposed Black king. Opening the e-file now creates immediate pressure on Black's weakened kingside structure. The exchange on d5 opens the f-file and challenges White's central pawn structure. Unleashing the queen to dominate the center, exploiting Black's weakened pawn structure. Pushing the knight to the edge of the board offers little immediate promise, potentially trapping it while the opponent controls the center. Suddenly, White's rook awakens, eyeing the weakened kingside pawn structure and ready to exploit any defensive lapse. Prioritizing piece activity, Black aims to reposition the knight for a more active role, perhaps preparing for future central action or defense. Opening the bishop's diagonal offers a pawn push that seeks to disrupt Black's defensive setup and create new attacking avenues. A bold attempt to solidify the queen's influence and prepare for a centralized fight. Unleashing a forceful check, White aims to dismantle Black's defensive structure around the king. Sacrificing space and initiative, Black seeks to regroup, but White's exposed king remains a significant concern. Repositioning the queen to g3 eyes that exposed f7 square and prepares a potential attack on the king side. Recapturing the pawn opens up Black's king, creating potential attacking lines for White's queen and knight. Consolidating forces, the queen repositions, aiming to fortify the vulnerable king's defenses. Reclaiming the initiative, Black aims to redistribute forces and defend the beleaguered king. Unleashing the knight to disrupt Black's queenside slumber, demanding immediate attention. Protecting the pawn on d5 and developing the bishop to a more active diagonal. Initiating another forceful king check, White seeks to disrupt Black's defense and regain the initiative through aggressive piece play. A desperate attempt to shield the king, offering little relief from the persistent pressure. Unleashing the rook down the open file, a bold gamble to shatter Black's defenses and expose their king. Black ignites a desperate counterattack on the king side, seeking active piece play amidst White's imposing pawn structure. Unleashing the knight towards the Black king creates immediate mating threats, forcing a desperate defense. Probing the knight's potential to dominate the center after the pawn structure shifts. King safety is now a severe concern after the rook's daring sortie. Trading queens here surrenders the initiative, creating a precarious endgame for Black. Unleashing the rook's power on the open file reshapes the board's balance. Sacrificing the bishop here, though it captures a piece, leaves your king exposed and unable to defend itself from the imminent mating attack. This recapture opens the f-file, creating immediate attacking potential against Black's king. Reactivating the knight to d4, aiming to disrupt White's kingside control. Repositioning the knight to e2 anticipates a pawn push on the kingside, aiming to bolster White's defensive structure. Repositioning the rook to a more active square, it now eyes the e-file's potential, preparing for future advances. Solidifying the queenside structure aims to prevent Black's active pieces from infiltrating further. Repositioning the knight to g7 offers a defensive shield and prepares to contest the critical central squares. Snatching that knight opens a clear path for your rook and eliminates a key defender of Black's remaining pawns. Exchanges the knight for a pawn, simplifying into an endgame where White's rook remains highly active. The pawn advance unravels the kingside, creating a passed pawn and opening lines for the rook. Recapturing the rook opens up lines, but the pawn structure is now seriously compromised. Suddenly, a promising path for the king opens with a pawn breakthrough. Recapturing the pawn with the bishop abandons the crucial kingside defense and exposes your monarch. Capturing the pawn opens the diagonal for your remaining bishop to exert pressure. Repositioning the rook to the second rank offers a fresh defensive line against white's encroaching pawns. The king is now exposed on the king side, making this aggressive check a powerful forcing move. The black king, now exposed on the d-file, faces immediate danger as the white rook eyes a deadly check. The rook's repositioning now eyes the vulnerable king, preparing a decisive attack on the weakened royal defenses.